right, I think we can get started here. And welcome to this webcast. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Today's webcast is going to be on the topic of guidance on leading the cloud security journey. I think the topic is pretty well apparent what it is intended to do. Today's session is led by myself, Jason Lam, and also Lysandra. Let me give you a quick intro of myself first before we start. So you know my name, and I am an instructor over here at SANS for many number of years. In my day job, I work for a large financial organization that is global in nature, and I've been with the company for a number of years, traveling globally, being located in many different countries. And now I'm settled in the US and, being just like most of you, practicing a lot of different, security discipline and, just leading the organization towards, being more secure. My personal interests, in the security world are mostly related to application security and also cloud security, which is today's topic. I've been with SANS, teaching, aside from doing my day job, I've been teaching for SANS for almost 20 years at this point. And, there is a great journey, to be sharing my knowledge with everyone. With that, I also have Lysandra with me. Lysandra, would you like to give a quick intro of yourself, please?
Hey, Jason, thank you very much. So, as Jason just said, my name is Lysandra Capella. I'm the owner of Checkmate Cyber Consultancy. It's a consultancy in the Dutch Caribbean. We help companies in their transformation to the cloud. We also do different security disciplines. I have also a financial background in which I had worked for a couple of years, about 10, 15 years in the financial industry. I have been working with SANS since 2016 now. Perhaps a few of you know me as I virtually for different SANS classes. And I think that's about it. Excited about today's topic. So let's get started, Jason.
Great. Let's roll for us. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's get us started here. So the first slide that we're going to go into is really just giving everybody a brief overview of what we're going to be talking about. As the title is going to lead us down the path of talking about how do you lead your cloud security journey. Let's talk about cloud journey in general, right? Most of the organizations these days have current infrastructure likely on-prem or otherwise co-located, whichever model that you're currently using. Likely you're doing a lot of the operations yourself. So wanting to get into the cloud journey usually lead off by looking at how do you plan for it, and then building certain level of foundation to get ready to do the migration, right? What that means is that you just don't go and do it nilly-willy. Most of the organization realizes that, hey, there are business benefit, there may be IT benefit. Some of them see that as a way to propel sort of the IT application journey to make sure that it goes a lot quicker and a lot more agile. Other organizations see the benefit as being able to get out of some of the operational tasks. And whichever way your organization is realizing or seeing that benefit, you will likely need to do a certain level of building the foundation because it's not built in one day. So there is going to be a lot of preparation, planning, and obviously, for most of the organization, your cloud service provider, your CSP, in other words, is likely going to be with you on a journey to help you with that, right? Otherwise, I've seen also a lot of organizations using consultancy, to help them as well. And then there is going to be a journey to migrate. And with the migration, there are going to be a lot of different, models of doing so, like, certain, so for example, Microsoft, recommend the power of 10. So they're saying, hey, move 10, a bundle of 10 applications all at the same time and so on. So there are going to be different strategies to do that, and then you run operations and then continue to optimize, right? So the optimization journey never really ends. Cloud security or even cloud migration is not done, just because your application is, into the cloud day one or day zero. Is more about continuous improvements, because there are the concept of minimum viable product MVP is definitely ingrained into a lot of organizations these days. Hey, what do we need to do? If you think about it, AWS has many, about if I take a quick count, it's about 500-600 of different services. No organization in day one is going to adopt them all. Well, not even 20 to begin with, right? Like usually I see organizations getting into the cloud, adopting maybe about, I would say anywhere from 10 to 15 different services. That's usually how they get started, right? So, over time, you're going to expand. And over time, for those even 10, 15 things that you're adopting, you are going to do a lot of improvement in the beginning. So there are going to be also a lot of different choices that you can make. Like, for example, I'll name a very, very quick one that I see a lot, particularly to organizations that are new into the cloud, would be making the choice of, hey, do I run these, Fortinet, Palo Alto firewall, or do I jump right in ahead and press forward with using your cloud service providers, firewall services? Like, which way do you want to go? Like, there are lots of different choices. And, the cloud journey is full of choices that we as leaders can certainly make along the way. With that, that's really our backdrop here. And with that, we can go on to the next slide to talk about, how do we make all these choices, to make ourselves more secure in terms of our environment. With that, so the question that I get a lot from a lot of my students, from a lot of my peers in the industries and so on, is that, hey, how secure is my cloud environment? Everybody asks that question. And, what does, and I get a lot of questions like, hey, what does good look like? What does secure look like in your mind, Jason? Like, I get that a lot. I can show you probably some of my Twitter message, some of my LinkedIn messages. I get a lot from peers in the industry and so on. What does that look like? And is my environment good? What is the next journey? Well, what is the next step in my improvement journey? Because everybody knows that is not going to be a day one thing, to become secure. There's going to be iterative steps. So the question is like, hey, in my organization situation, what do I need to do to become more secure? That's usually the question that I hear a lot. And with hearing all that, right, like, I get that a lot. So it's almost ingrained in my mind that I've got a set of answers that, I generally provide to people. Next slide, please. It is exactly for that reason that, I basically solicited the help of Lysandra, who is here with us today, and came up with a cloud security maturity framework. Number one thing, right? Like, hey, although we're SANS, we do training and so on, this resource is actually free. And, we publish it and, give out the information for free so that we can guide organizations, hopefully like yours, into this cloud security journey and helping you to answer those questions that we've seen in the last slide. The idea here with the cloud security maturity, framework is really, a number of things, right? Namely 8 different security domains that we have grouped together. We have summarized things into 8 different domains. And under each of the domain, there are numerous capabilities. Some domains have more, some domains have less. And the whole idea is each of the capability within the domain, we also rate them by 5 different stages of maturity. So that, and by the way, by the 5, we also use, align with the wording and the assessment model with the CMMI maturity framework. So it's going to be 1 to 5, to make things a little bit easy and, a little bit more familiar for people who are used to doing, sort of maturity assessment. And with that, the framework that I was talking about, we actually wrap it up nicely into a poster. I am going to admit to it that, we've got a lot of details over there. And when I say the poster, it's a little bit of an eye chart, right? But the whole idea of it is, we are giving out that information, and there are going to be different format that you can actually use, this particular info. The actual poster, we're going to put it on the next slide. And by the way, some of you may ask a question. A lot of you have gotten the email that SANS have sent out. I think it has my name on it. That there is a new course that are going to beta. Is the LDR Leadership 520, the Cloud Security for Leaders. That course is basically written according to the blueprint of the cloud maturity, the cloud security maturity framework. So the two are basically very, very much aligned. Next slide, please. So talking about the cloud security maturity model, that's what we're talking about, right? Like, again, I gave you the forewarning, it's going to be a lot of information, but it's over here. So we break things down into 8 different domains. I won't read them all, but you can just see them. Infrastructure, architecture, and also protection, for example, security governance. So, over here, within each of the domain, we have multiple capabilities. For example, config management falls under infrastructure, architecture, and protection, right? That's on the upper left-hand corner. And, within it, there are 5 different, maturity stages. The slide just moved. Apologize for that. Yep. Back to the right slide. So there are 5 different stages of maturity that, we see organizations go from, I call it 0 to hero. And by the way, no worries. I don't expect you to be able to see all the detailed wording. There's no quiz on which word is what, but just want to give a little bit of insight about what this maturity model overall at the grand scheme of things look like. And, obviously today's webcast, we're going to dive into some of these areas so that we can share with you some of the knowledge, some of the experience that we have acquired over the years, and give you a sense about, hey, if you were to adopt some of this maturity model, what does that look like? What would you be doing? And that's that. Next slide, please. Okay, so the security domains are listed here. Again, we're going to dive into each of them, but we have the different aspects of this of cloud security. So security governance being a big item, there are technical topics, if you will, and then there are not so technical topics, right? Like, for example, I would say that the not so technical, the more management, leadership centric topic would be the security governance, a little bit of assurance as well, right? Like, and also workforce transformation. Some of the other topics will be, or some of the other domains would be a lot more technical in nature, because today's cloud security model is not just going to be like, okay, I set up a few things according to the best practices. I use CIS benchmark to assess my environment, and we're good, right? There's going to be a lot more details associated with it. So, again, like that's what we're going to talk about. And on the right-hand side, you see that, there is a general progression there. The maturity level, like the 1 or 5, is going to be used to measure the general stance of where you are. And if you're at a 3 level and you want to plan for 4, right, what would that look like? So that's basically, how we structure this whole thing. Next slide, please. So the first one that I want to convey here today, or review here today with all of you, is going to be the detection and response, which is one area that is hugely important in cloud. Well, this one is also a very obvious one. The detection and response obviously means that, hey, once you move into the cloud environment, how do you actually do detection? How do you actually do monitoring? I know that everybody will say that, hey, we can collect logs, and once we collect the logs, we will analyze it, right? But the question is, how do you analyze them? And most of the organization just pile a bunch of logs together. And collecting the logs is important, is great. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that once you collect the logs, you will be able to analyze them effectively. So that brings us to the top of the slide, which is security intelligence. In this particular capability, right? Like the measurement is really about how your organization actually collect the intelligence. Like, what do you actually look for? Do you share with your peers, right? Or share with organizations, inside your country? There are usually certain organizations that gives out intel. And the other question also is, how do you actually adopt those intelligence into your analysis tools to be able to be effective? And at a later stage, once you get to maturity 4 or 5, right, then it becomes the game of how do you actually render your own intelligence based on your detection. So over time, most organizations detect things, and how do you actually do the feedback loop and get all those intelligence, all those experience that you have amassed over the years and days of actually detecting things back into using it effectively against your adversaries. The other side of it obviously is, we all read news, right? We're all security practitioners. We all read news, but how do you actually integrate those information? How do you actually have a team of people to put their thought process back into hunting and also detection within the logs that you have collected? Otherwise, the logs just sit there, right? So that's security intelligence. The other side obviously is collecting the logs, right? Like, which is at the bottom of the slide. Gathering the logs, while it sounds very easy, and it generally is, right? Like, most of the idea of cloud is that the cloud service provider have done a really, really good job at generating logs. It's almost to a point where I personally call it very excessive. The question is not just, hey, could I get the logs? The question is, what kind of logs? And the question also is, how do you actually ditch or get rid of the things that you do not need? And usually that statement is, generate a lot of different discussion. Because a lot of people believe that, oh yeah, we collect all the logs. Let me be clear, right? Like, in the cloud environment, the Microsoft, the Google of the world have created, so much logs that you will never be able to collect all of them ever, right? Yeah, well, that's a stretch statement, but it's so overwhelming that you have to figure out what is actually beneficial, and trimming it down at the top end of the maturity is going to be beneficial, because when you're looking for that needle in a needle stack, how do you actually be effective at it? You have to trim down on the needle stack, right? So finding the right balance between those logs are really, really effective. Really, a big efficiency factor. Another thing that is here is, for log management is also, that you have to be consistent about, let's say you launch 15 different instances of containers. Some of them you're logging, some of them you're not. That's going to lead to a lot of problems. So, having that consistency as you roll out your infrastructure is going to be very important. And then, needless to say, there is going to be the analysis and monitoring. The question is, like, what do you actually monitor, right? Like, these days, people use these many different products like CSPM, Cloud Security Posture Management tools. Those become some of your monitoring scope as well. So you're not just monitoring bad people on your infrastructure, on your cloud infrastructure, cloud application, but also, hey, are there any violation? Are there any suspicious things that are happening? And any of those compliance issues may over time get into a bigger issue over time. So you would want to watch out for those. The other side of it obviously is your response. In cloud, your response are going to look drastically different than your on-prem environment in general, because you have all these automation capability, and nobody has enough employee or staff members to be able to take care of things. And to be able to be efficient and effective in cloud security, you have to actually automate, your responses. The question is how much and how, the other measurement is how quick you can generally respond to incidents that are happening in your environment and how accurate you do those things. Those are some of the measurements that we see in your response area. And next slide, please. Now, talking about all those, this is the only domain that I want to deeper dive into. And the reason is that, we only have an hour here. The rest of the material is actually inside that poster that we showed you before. But the question about the deeper dive is, the area that I talked about earlier, what does that maturity capability look like? So, and I actually have 2 slides here to, which correspond to the poster that we can take a look at the capability here. Next slide, please. So take a look at the first slide. So, when I say that, I break it down into like 5 different maturity stages. That's what it looks like. The three of them are on this slide, 2 on the next slide, by the way. But the top level of it is initially, what does it look like, right? You may be subscribing to certain level of intelligence feed. At a managed level, you are figuring out which are the trusted sources that you are actually putting into your detection tool. It's not enough to say, yeah, I have a bunch of email, right? Like that, people are feeding intelligence to me. You have to actually apply it. So, at managed stage, which is maturity 2, you're actually looking at whether you're actually applying it. And at the same time, a big point of that is whether your team that are analyzing these intelligence actually understand your environment. This may sound really, really, basic and fundamental, but a lot of the intelligence team, they're so consumed by looking at what's going on in the industry that they don't keep track of, what is changing inside their environment. So if you don't have, the context to actually analyze the intelligence, then you're going to lose sight of things. So that will be, your maturity 2 and so on. Now 3, once you get to that point, then you want to start trimming down the intelligence because, at a certain point, you will find yourself to be, okay, I have this feed, I have that feed, I have some open source feed. Which one is useful? They're not all useful to you. They're not all relevant, right? So how do you actually trim it down into what's the signal to noise ratio being very good for your organization? And obviously you will, try to generate new detection logic from your learning from your own incident and hunting activities in the environment at that point as well. Next slide, please. So going into the 4 and the 5 over here, right? A quantitatively managed, which is 4, right? Is going to be, you're starting to do the threat modeling and purple team exercises so that you can refine your understanding. Like the context that we talked about earlier becomes much more, at the forefront. Your team actually know it really, really, really well, right? Like if somebody were to do this in my organization, what would that actually look like? And can I detect them, right? It's that sort of analysis. And then, also the threat intelligence can also help you make more strategic security decision as well. Things like, hey, my staffing, level, is that sufficient? A factor of that is going to be like, what is going on the outside? What is going on in the industry? So you can actually drive some of those decisions. And also, some of your product or service purchasing decision can be driven by your intelligence as well. And at the 5, at the topmost level, more metrics driven, refinement, and also, adjust your defensive configuration of your infrastructure as well. These are the measurement in this particular capability area. So, again, just to summarize here, from 1 to 5, yeah, you're going to go from 0 to hero. And these are some of the high-level measurements that we can provide, regardless of your organization size and level. You can adopt these as your measurement in general. And by the way, some of the people ask me, hey, does this generally align with, the for example, the well-architected framework and so on? Yeah, we have reviewed a lot of those frameworks, like the big three cloud service provider, and I would say that it generally aligns with them. The structure can be a little different, but we generally capture all the essence of those. And one of the good use cases here is definitely if you have a multi-cloud environment, then these non-product or service provider centric guidance can also help you, because we're not sided with Microsoft, the Google of the world. So we're giving you, views from just a practitioner standpoint. So that's how we look at the 1 to 5 in this particular area. For the next, areas, we won't be deeper. We won't be deep diving into each of the area. And next slide, please. And I'm going to hand it over now to my partner over here, Alessandra, to talk about, the IAM area.
Hey, thank you, Jason. So I saw some questions coming in. We will have a Q&A where we will be answering the questions at the end. So feel free to keep sending the questions. We're seeing them, and we will be addressing each one of them at the end of the session. As Jason just mentioned, I won't be deep diving as Jason just went through each one of the areas, but I will be giving a high level overview of the domains that we will be covering. The first one is identity and access management, and that one has 3 capabilities: identity management, segregation, and access management. Unlike a traditional data center where assets are more static, in the cloud, everything is much more dynamic. That means in a matter of seconds, you can spin up a resource or you can decommission one. And there comes the importance of identity and access management. It's very important to know who has the access to be able to take these actions. If you take a look at the latest headlines for cloud breaches, the data leaks, most of them are due to identity and access management failures. And just a simple mistake in this area can lead to very big consequences. So with that, let's start looking at a few of the capabilities we have in this domain. The first one is identity management. I will be using a Cloud Castle as an example, and that's just your cloud environment. So to be able to enter your Cloud Castle, you need to be on a guest list. And if you have different cloud environments, you will be keeping up with different guest lists. As your cloud journey continues to evolve, you will be having different guest lists and will become almost unmanageable. So you will start looking for something more manageable, trying to look for sophisticated systems that's perhaps centralized. And that's where the maturity model in the identity management comes in, that guides you through this process. The next capability we have is segregation. In segregation, we're going to take again our Cloud Castle. And in a castle, normally you have different wings. You might have a dining room wing and you have a bedroom wing. If someone enters your dining room wing, they don't automatically have access to your bedroom wing. And that's the same kind of segregation, isolation you want to have in your cloud environments. You want to have a segregation for your production, a production wing, a dev wing, and also perhaps a station wing. By having that, if an intruder gets access to your dev wing, they don't automatically are able to gain access to your production wing. And thereby you're limiting the blast radius of such security incidents. The last capability we have in identity and access management is access management itself. We talked about our guest list. That basically gives you access to enter the castle. But once you're inside the castle, you don't have any keys to be able to open the doors. And that's where access management comes in. You want to be able to open doors. In the beginning, you probably have just 1 or 2 trusted people that are managing all your cloud. They have access to all your resources, which is fine. But as your journey continues to evolve, you want to be improving that part. You want to be granting access based on roles. And that's how you continue to mature in that area. I want to give one key takeaway for the identity and access management. This is an ongoing job. And it gets more complex as your organization and your cloud users expand. It's not just set and forget. And I think Jason also mentioned that in the beginning, but it's very important to reiterate that. So with that, we're going to continue with our next domain, which is security governance. Security governance, you can see that as the GPS for your cloud journey. Without that, you will be sailing, without the GPS, you will be sailing on stormy, cloudy waters without knowing where you're going. And that can expose your organization to unnecessary risks. If you think about a city, they have different rules and committees to be able to function smoothly. And that's the same way for your cloud environment. You want to have rules to be able to operate securely and efficiently. And that's where these three capabilities come in: cost management, security policy, and cloud governance committee. So let's start with cost management. I think this is an area that a lot of people might be scared of because everybody, oh, to the cloud, that's going to cost me a lot of money. And cloud is like utility. You pay for what you consume. Without any governance, the cost can just spiral out of control. And you can compare it to a household. If you turn on all your devices in your house, all your appliances, keep them on for a month, at the end of the month, you're going to get a catastrophic bill. And that's the same with in the cloud. So that's where the capability maturity model there helps you with, okay, start with simple budget tracking and even going so far as later on to predictive analytics. One thing that's very important is that cost management isn't really about cutting the costs, but it's more about making sure your cloud investments work for you. The next capability we have here is security policy. This is your rule book. Just as a city has laws for everything from parking to building codes, your cloud environment needs to have a comprehensive security policy. In the beginning, you can start with basic guidelines, that's fine. But as your cloud journey continues to evolve, you need to ensure that your policies also continues to adapt and you're covering all the bases: data protection, access controls, compliance, and all the others. The more comprehensive and adaptable your policies are, the safer your cloud journey will be. The last capability we have is Cloud Governance Committee. This is a city council for the cloud. They're responsible for reviewing and ensuring the compliance for your environment. In the beginning, you might have just your IT or just a few people involved in this committee. But again, as you continue to evolve, you want to make sure that you get a cross-functional team that consists of not just the IT, but also your finance and business units. A takeaway for this domain is that by ensuring the maturity of your governance, it will allow you to make the most out of your cloud investments, safeguarding both your finances and your data in the cloud. So let's continue with our next domain. We just talked about the rules in the security governance one, but what about the cloud environment itself? How is it built? How do we protect it? And that's where these 5 capabilities come in. There are a lot more than all the others because it's more important, also more technical, but I'm going to go over them pretty quickly and not go very much in depth because there are a lot in here. So let's start with configuration management. Again, we're going to look at our cloud castle. You will have wiring and plumbing in place. Initially, you will just be following best practices as closely as possible. But as you progress, you want to have automated checks in place to make sure everything still remains intact. Everything is still fine. You don't want to have a do-it-yourself catastrophe happening. The next one is image management. And you can see that like it's taking a snapshot of one of the rooms in the castle. You take the snapshot of the room and you copy it and create identical rooms in the rest of the castle. But of course, over time, your room will evolve. You will be putting flowers, you will be changing the beds, you will be moving things around. And that's the same with your images. That's why you want to make sure that as your cloud journey evolves, your images continue to be regularly updated and scanned for vulnerabilities. The next capability we have is cloud security architecture. This you can compare to your initial setup of your castle, the basic blueprint of your castle. And that's as simple as this is the walls that we want, this is the courtyard we're going to have. And in your cloud, that will be your landing zone. As you mature in your cloud journey, you want to be looking at creating well-established castle designs using, for example, the well-architected framework Jason just mentioned. The next capability we have is resource management. This is where you label and manage all your cloud's resources. Initially, you will be doing this manually. But of course, you will be seeing that you're going to start spinning up more resources and using more other different clouds, and this starts to become unmanageable. You want to have this organized, and that's where you start automating these steps. Your ultimate goal in this capability is to make sure that it can be managed through multiple clouds and constantly being aligned to security guidelines. The last capability we have in this domain is network controls. And normally when you start your cloud journey, you're just using the initial basic controls that are available. But as your cloud journey starts evolving and you start using more capabilities of the cloud, you will start using more sophisticated controls like VPCs, virtual private clouds, network segmentation, or other advanced monitoring to keep an eye out on your cloud environment. The takeaway for this domain is that your cloud environment it's very important to have a well-planned and secure structure that can easily adjust to any changes that you're making. So let's continue to our next domain, which from all, it's not the least important, because even if you have technology, you will need to have people to make it happen. And I already saw some people asking about skill set and stuff like that. We will be talking about a bit deeper, not in this section, but at the end, we will be answering the question. So workforce readiness is something that's very crucial. For successful cloud migration and any ongoing operation, you want to make sure that you have the right tools, but also the right people. Let's take a look at the capabilities. The first one, skill readiness. In the beginning, you might have 1 or 2 people, and we are all IT. Most of us are IT, and you're always excited of any shiny new toy. That's something that, so they're just doing everything. They're building your cloud environment. They're also putting the security protocols in place. That's fine. You want to build on those skills. Make sure that they have the right capabilities, the right knowledge to be able to build your environment correctly. But over time, the training program that you have need to expand to other roles also, such as your developers, your infrastructure teams, and your security personnel. This will ensure there's a broad understanding of consistent application of your security measures. The skill readiness is an ongoing, evolving process, and it involves all your team members and not just IT specialists. The next capability we have is organizational alignment. We talked about starting ad hoc, and this is the same thing. In the beginning, you don't have any roles. Everybody is doing everything because everybody likes the shiny new toy. That's nice, it's exciting. But as you progress, you want to start establishing your formal roles. You can use a racing model, security functions, mapping them. And as your cloud journey evolves, you want to ensure that everybody knows what their role and what the responsibility is in securing and having an effective cloud environment. The takeaway for this domain is that readiness is not just a checkbox. Okay, I have given them this training, that's enough. Cloud continues to evolve. It's something that you need to continue investing in your people continuously to keep them up to date, but also aligned with your new strategy. I think with that, Jason, I'm going to hand it off back over to you. Thank you.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you for walking us through all those domains. That was really, really informative. So, and there are more to come, right? I think there are 3 more to come. And I want to talk to you about the data protection domain. So in this domain, there are 3 different capabilities that we measure. Like data protection, this is very, very, very much common sense here, right? Like, hey, you put data over in cloud, while your cloud service provider try to help you, hey, we'll secure a portion of the cloud, you still need to configure certain things to protect the data. So, the question then becomes like, associated with data protection, everybody think about encryption, which is right? Encryption is going to be able to help with certain level of protection. The point about it isn't just, okay, I've got TLS, turn it on and it's good, right? Like it's not a binary 0 or 1. There are certain situations where you have to turn it on in certain ways. Well, the good thing about it is your CSPs, like your cloud service providers, generally already help you with it by turning most of it on. So, at the beginning, when you look at it, it's like, okay, it's all done, right? But when you actually look deep into it, then there's a lot more to go, right? the question over here in this domain is like, hey, how do you actually manage your keys? Because it's not just about turning it on. Turning it on is easy. How do you actually do it consistently with all your different services that you're going to adopt from your cloud service provider? That's number one. The other side of it also is, how do you actually manage your key? Because there are multiple different models. For example, right, some of the models that we need to think about is, do you trust, ultimately, hey, your AWS, do you trust them to just go and figure out the key situation for me? I don't want to get involved in it. Well, what if, right, your cloud service provider got hacked or there's an insider there? What do you do then, right? So that becomes a concern. So the question is, you want to be able to have those discussions internally and make sure that, A, you understand the 4 or 5 different models of key management. Like it ranges from, the spectrum of letting the cloud service provider handle it all, right? Like we trust you ultimately, to the other side of, what we call the BYOK or HYOK, which is like bring your own key, or you do the hold your own key, right? Like, essentially you don't trust them. And you keep all of the key material inside your 4 walls on-prem, or find another provider to actually entrust the key with. So that's really the journey here that we talk about with data encryption. And the question also is like, hey, do you do it inside your application? Do you do it inside some of the services that are provided by your CSP? Those are some of the maturity considerations that you have to, consider. The other side of it, obviously, is the data classification and protection. Well, without knowing the classification of data, then it would be very hard to protect them. Now, I would you've heard me saying that, I don't necessarily trust all the CSPs out there. I don't, but I want to give them the credit. They are doing it. They are doing an amazing job, right? Like between the AWS, between the Google, and also the Microsoft, they did a really, really wonderful job. Like, I remember like 10, 15 years ago, if you were to discover all your data, like go and crawl through all your data in your data center, figure out where they are, and figure out, whether they're sensitive, like you're dreaming, right? Now, we're coming to an age where these things are starting to be possible. Like there is a iteration there that you can leverage some of these services that are provided by your CSP to go and crawl through. You will have to develop certain level of rule set to discover the data, like the sensitive data across your multiple data sets. But you can also apply very consistent policy across your entire data domain to say, oh yeah, hey, I don't want credit card to ever be near any of these particular network area, right? Or these services. I don't want that to happen. You can write rules to sort of de-identify the data. And those are all possible. And those are the things that we, discuss the maturity on. At the bottom, right? You also have data backup and resiliency. Hey, most of the people who have been around the field for as long as I have been, right? That, starting with years ago, there was backup tape, and now mostly it's digital backup. That backup, everybody understands what it means. But there seems to be a layer that is more important nowadays, whether your backup is immutable, right? Can somebody come and whack your backup? It seems that the ransomware, gangs, right, are very, very active at doing that. And nowadays, organizations are coming to the realization that, hey, my backup isn't immutable. People come in, first thing that they do is go and delete my backup, right? Like that's one side of that journey. And then the other side is, sort of your overall recovery, resiliency. Can you, if you lose, some of the more important credential, for example, like, we'll talk about what happened to Microsoft with the storm. I think it's 558, right? Allegedly, the Chinese, origin, hackers that got into Microsoft and stole their key material. In that sort of situation, right? Like, can you recover? Do you know how to rebuild most of your, if you lose your cloud top level, the root level credential, could you still recover, right? how do you actually crawl through your data to say, yeah, these are good, those are not good, we need to recover from this particular point on? Can you do that? And I've seen a lot of organizations journey in this particular area, and I can tell you that this is very, very difficult work, right? There are iterative steps that organizations need to build confidence and need to build not just at the management or at the technical level, but also at a wide scale level. Like, how do you recover with the business help? And it's definitely not something that is just technical. Yeah, we can recover, because even the quickest organization, when they say they can recover, is probably talking about 12 to anywhere from 12 to 12 hours to mid 12 days, right? So that's really some of the ranges that we're talking about. So you need a lot of organization mobility to mobilize people and get action on it. So there are maturity that measure your data protection level in cloud. Next slide, please. And then security assurance. So this is where you can say that a big portion of it is going to be your vulnerability management. You set up certain target for your organization to strive for. Like, for example, hey, we'll never have these type of vulnerabilities, or this is really my organization's standard template of configurations. So how do you validate that? So this is beyond just vulnerability scanning and so on. In fact, I have talked to a lot of different management team. First thing they say is, yeah, we run these, whatever Rapid7, Qualys, whatever vulnerability scan. Yeah, we'll just point it over the IP address of our cloud infrastructure. Like, if you're thinking about that, that's probably maturity 0 or 1, right? So that's doesn't really, most of your IP scanner doesn't really work inside the cloud environment, right? So there has to be different level of posture validation. It is not just about scanning. A lot of them work by API. A lot of them just born natively in cloud as well. So there are different validation strategy, and there are different validation workflow that requires not just people go and double click and patch like in the olden days, right? So you would have to use different strategy to actually work through that. So there are iterative, steps that organization need to get through to go from a really, traditional model into the cloud-centric, validation, and also the remediation model. The other side of it is, regulatory compliance. Hey, nobody wants to go to jail. So, validating, working with your legal team, getting a compliance team, making sure that you understand the target, and then work towards the compliance area. The two of the things that I just talked about, requires a lot of stakeholders management. Usually, security team become a little bit of a facilitator in some of these campaign and journey. And building that, organization structure to actually help you with it is really, really crucial over here. So, the maturity model also measures against those things. The other side of it, obviously, is, I talk a little bit about security testing. By the way, I know most of the organizations, or all organizations these days, do pen testing. That's just one side of security testing. There are going to be app testing, specifically for cloud. You will monitor your posture. With regards to your container, you may have different testing strategy, and then you want to test your monitoring capability and your response capability as well. So those are some of the high-level stuff that I can just rhyme off. So there are a few things there that you would want your security testing to be covering, at least. It is not just, okay, pen test. And even if you were just to do pen test, you would have to structure the cloud level testing very differently. Everybody uses the cloud differently. So, if you just walk over to a, your friendly pen testing firm, they wouldn't know how to help you, right? Like, they would come up with something very generic that may or may not help you. So yeah, catering to your organization's testing need is going to be, something that you need to work on. Next slide, please. Okay, so and then there's application and workload protection. All organizations don't just go to the cloud for fun. there are technical reasons and organization reasons that they want to put their application and workload, your tasks, your actual work, computation, and so on into the cloud. So as you do that, right, like how do you protect those applications that are inside the cloud? And that, by the way, that also includes all your development process. Nowadays, everybody is using CI/CD pipeline, and most of those are actually residing in the cloud as well. And you need to be able to protect them, because I could not tell you how many times, we've seen on the news that, the attackers are not just hacking you, but also hacking some of your development pipeline. And if some of those tools are not necessarily locked down, for example, the credential is loose, then the attackers could easily get inside your CI/CD pipeline, inject bad code or backdoor into your environment. We've seen, big organizations or, some of the more, sort of newsworthy incidents that happen in this area. Namely, the SolarWinds incident is a very, very good reminder that we need to secure those areas as well. So over here, there are obviously security application practices that you need to practice, right? Within cloud, the cloud gives you the capability to do automation to the fullest extent. And a lot of organizations, their development team are leveraging that, I would say, to a very, very good extent as well, right? From one release of software a year, getting into the one release a day or one release, every few hours. That's a big jump. And how do you actually, with that jump, each of the iteration of your software may not get all the testing that, you traditionally do. Then the question is like, how do you actually structure it? And there are many practices over there, for organization to consider as well. The other side is also, there are security protection services. I can rhyme off a few, like web firewall. There are cloud workload protection services that actually tie in with your code. If you're running serverless or your container, these services can protect your workload that are running in those environments and provide better locking as well. So the adoption model is part of the maturity as well. So there are many different services, but again, like it's not just a matter of, okay, turn it on, we walk away and it's safe. There are going to be different tuning because, the chances are if you turn it on by the default, you're likely going to disable your application. The question is like, how do you progressively work through that journey? It is not easy by any means, stretch or form. And then, obviously there is going to be, similar to the testing that we talked about earlier, like some of these assessment of your workload need to be considered as well. So those are the, within the application and workload area, some of the capabilities that we measure within the framework as well. Next slide, please. So we've talked a lot about different the domains, like namely the 8 different domains. We have, covered pretty quickly across the board. Again, we publicize the framework in the form of poster. And to be honest, like, right now I will be providing more of those information as we go along. I'm still, so I'm trying to wrap up some of the information and trying to provide a little more guidance on how to, measure some of these things. That's going to be my next step of, publishing more on this framework. And together with that, right, like, if any of you is more interested in some of these topics, there is a course, right, like the LDR 520 Cloud Security for Leaders. That course is aligned to this particular framework. We basically structure the course according to this, 8 different domains. We deep dive a lot into each of the area. And the course now is expanded over to 5 days format. So we have sufficient amount of time to actually cover these topics. If you want to connect with me or Lysandra, this is the, LinkedIn information coordinates that you can connect with us. With that, can we go to the next slide, please? Yeah, we talk about the 520, take a look at it. Here's a code. yeah, because of the beta run that is in December, there's a 25% off on that. So, hey, if you're interested, definitely take advantage of that. With that, I'm gonna start taking questions. Next slide. I think some of the questions already were in earlier. By the way, if you have any questions, now would be a really good time to type it in and I'll get them answered. Before I get to taking any of the new questions, there were some questions that were asked during the session, and I tried to attempt to answer them, and I'll just summarize some of them here, right? So, some of the questions were, let me just review them. So earlier, I got a question about what are the big three framework that I was mentioning about. I was referring specifically to the well-architected framework. Some of the CSP call it well architecture framework and so on. But if you Google well-architected framework, and if you use GCP, just type in GCP into it, you will find it. So each of the CSP have published their own respective guidance on where they see their customer to say, how do you want to structure your architecture? By the way, it's not just architecture. For example, if you take a quick peek at it, you will see that it goes into the practices as well. So it's not just so much architecture, but also the things that your organization need to do to be secure if you're leveraging that cloud environment. It tends to be a little more centric to the vendor itself. But each of the cloud service provider have their own, right? So I think ever since AWS started the whole journey, then everybody swarm in and everybody publicized their own version of it as well. It's a little different, but again, my message earlier is that our model over here aligns to all of them, and we try to be non-biased about hey, do we just we don't just cater to one cloud, we cater to all of you that use many different cloud service provider. That's sort of the idea. Let me just see if there is another question that I want to summarize here. Yep, on the poster itself, we generally update the poster, I would say every year. So, and I tend to update the maturity model a little more frequent than that. So, we'll catch up. Usually, by the end of the year, we'll publicize the new version of the poster, and thereby the model can be updated inside the poster. I think that's that. Don't see any on the answered questions. Let me also see the new questions that come in. If an organization is just starting out, what are some of the initial steps to get started applying the maturity model? I'll give you my take on it very quickly. I would say that, there we go. I would say that, the first thing that you want to do is take a look at your current state. The description within the capability help you to measure, hey, where am I? Am I a 1? Am I a 2? Then what you can do is, if, for example, right, if in the capability you're already a 2, then you will want to look at the description in 3, 4, and 5 to see where you want to plot out your journey next. And that's where, hey, just like any other maturity model, this helps you that way. Be aware that, some of these, for example, if you're doing logging and so on, sometimes it will cross over to, configuration management as well, because, part of logging is also configuration management. So there is a little bit of crossover to other areas. Just be aware of that. But I would, generally summarize as that. Lysandra, do you have any other, good tips on that particular front as, helping organizations starting out this journey?
I think what you just mentioned regarding first looking at what your current maturity level is, and from there starting to move, I think that's the good approach. I think that's the right approach to do that. I'm good with that. So I'm seeing some more questions come in. There was one question regarding, could you share some insight on the key skills and certification that employers value towards cloud security when hiring entry-level professionals? I know that well, SANS has, I'm not trying to plug it, but SANS has a cloud security curriculum, and they have different classes. I'm going to be pasting the link in the Slack channel, and they guide you through each one. For the beginners, they have I think 308, which is Introduction to Cloud Computing and Security. So that would be the basis that you can start with, and from there you can just move on with a flight plan. They have a complete flight plan that will guide you through the different skills and the roles that you would want to go to.
Cool. And one of the other question that I see here is, what are the most common threats found to cloud security? That's a, I think that's a really, really, really large question. I would love to tackle it, but I think we don't have enough time. Like now, maybe that's a future webcast, or, I think some of our peers, or, talk about that, through other webcasts as well. But I would generally say the following, right? Like, these days, the threats are coming from many different vectors. I would not specifically say, okay, this is the biggest one and only tackle that. I would definitely, if you are at the leadership level, if you're on the blue team level, I would definitely focus more on, how do you actually structure your defenses, layer the defenses so that they are strong against all sorts of different threats. I think that's a better investment, from a leadership standpoint, at least. But granted, right, like having awareness of what threats are affecting us are important as well. So yeah, I think that's something that, other webcasts or a future webcast from us can address that. And are there any mentors available to help guide organizations through maturity framework in order to produce a strategy? Good question. I personally don't do consulting, because I work for a large organization myself. But I think Lysandra does. Lysandra, I think this is something that you can address that. Like, do you or your peers do some work?
Yes, I would be happy to help. And also, I think the course itself is a good starting point for yourself to also have the knowledge to be able to see how to guide your organization through this maturity framework. If you after that need any mentors, any assistance, you can always reach out to me. Happy to help.
Yeah, there are going to be a lot of different organizations, that use the SANS framework and other framework of theirs, to be able to help you assess. But I would generally say that, the journey usually start off with the assessment, and then plot out a map or chart to say, hey, here's a heat map, and these are the first priority that you want to address first. And then, get on with the improvement plan. That's what it looks like. All right. I think those are all the questions that we have today. Judging by all the questions, this seems to be a very, very, very well attended. And, I love all the engagement from everyone. Thank you very much for your time today. And, hopefully you find this information useful. We'll see you at the next webcast or at a major SANS event. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. See you at the next.